I got a video reply that I'm going to be posting to YouTube and then sharing on Facebook to Allie from Allie's End Zone, Chilling with Allie, Relaxing with Allie, alright? So, give a breakdown of a few things, since I'm putting you in the know, okay? So, imagine going ahead and proving a particle physics theory that ultimately, before neuroplasticity and, brain surgery, you wouldn't have been able to go ahead and explain. But the only reason that you were able to explain it is because you had to literally work your way through death, work your way through a vegetative state and a comatose. Alright? In order to be able to thoroughly understand the concept. And then having to take years of figuring out a way to explain it, alright? So, I hate to have to go ahead and use this as an example, but Marvel, alright? If you think of, Avengers Infinity War, when the Ancient One went to go explain to Professor Hulk, about the hazards of displacing the Infinity Stones throughout time and space. Alright? Think of the concept of time, alright? Ultimately, time really is a man-made concept. And when I say man-made, I'm not talking in a gender aspect, I'm talking about species aspect, So, think about this, alright? People require sleep, alright? Sleep deprivation is a form of psychological warfare, alright? The body literally relies on sleep in order to be able to heal, alright? So, you reach one level of consciousness when in sleep, alright? Now, the brain does anything that it can to be the survivor, even if the sole survivor and the rest of the body shuts down. Once brain function ceases, at that point, it's pretty much a hopeless cause to go ahead and attempt to keep the person alive and on life support, alright? So imagine people being mad at you because while you were in a coma, alright, they bet against your survival by going ahead and everybody else dogpiling and taking life insurance policies put as pretty much their life savings, alright, into those life insurance policies, betting that you wouldn't wake up, alright? So not only do you end up waking up, but ultimately, too, you end up finding out that all of a sudden you've got a massive medical bill and that you're facing medical bankruptcy. But now here's the thing. Those same individuals ended up going ahead and going around town, doing a whole media tour, trying to go ahead and get up a collection to be able to help alleviate some of the burden, alright? But now, instead of the person dying in that coma, they come back from that coma, alright? Now that they've come back from that coma, there are a few answers that they don't want to have to give to the general public. Like, for example, hey, didn't you end up taking a collection to be able to cover their surgical cost? Why is it that they're facing medical bankruptcy? Because it's kind of seeming like, it was said that that collection was gotten up to be able to help with medical costs. But now the person that was in a coma, quite literally the only person that was incapable of committing any of the fraud that you went to try to pin on them, they're facing financial problems and their credit score sunk to shit because you took up a collection to be able to cover those costs. There was enough of a collection to be able to cover the entirety of the cost, yet somehow or another you went to go basically put it on their tab and be like, that's the problem for future them to figure out. While simultaneously, you wanted to go ahead and profit off of their death. And now keep in mind, too, in that coma, time, very different concept, all right? Sleep, coma, death, and life. They are all in the same prism of reality, all right? So, just imagine that pretty much the way that Doctor Strange did it with looking for every potential inevitability, that really wasn't too far off, all right? So, every decision that ends up getting made, every near death experience survived, everything, full accumulation, ends up going ahead and actually fighting predestination. Because obviously, the part you play and the decisions you make end up going ahead and playing a contributing factor. So imagine people just trying to dog the shit out of you. Well, for years, you were quite literally doing charity work. You quite literally were helping nonprofits. You were quite literally going ahead and learning administrative law. You were also learning about probate law. You were learning about contract law. You were learning constitutional law, civil rights law. But, all right. And then, with the amount of brain function that I was supposed to have woken up with, I was supposed to not be capable of retaining any of that memory. So I've already become a statistical anomaly, all right? But now imagine in all of those different states, that time moves at a different pace, all right? So back in 2022, when it seemed like I was having a breakdown and in shock because of, the attempted vehicular manslaughter that I survived, I ended up going ahead and saying another business idea that I had was go ahead, get some 360-degree angle cameras, to be able to go ahead and set thermal filters to it, and be able to demonstrate particle manipulation. All right. People are like, can't do that. You can't do that. It's impossible. And yeah, I quite literally ended up proving that the laws of physics are more like the suggestions of physics. All right. So that video of the smoke, people thought, oh, it's just because of that filter. You're not showing anything. No, actually, ultimately, if you were to pay attention to string theory, it's believed that there's 10 or 11 dimensions to reality. And ultimately, third dimension is just physical. All right? But once getting to different levels of consciousness, being able to tap into different levels of reality. All right? So I make a video where all of a sudden I make a ladybug appear out of nowhere, but I got a thermal filter on. So people are like, oh, it's an optical illusion. No, it wasn't an optical illusion. But, I quite literally said, go ahead and play back the tape. You'll notice there are no cut and edit and everything in there. So that pissed people off. Because, how dare I understand something about physics that quite literally people in the upper echelon of competitive academia weren't able to solve using some of the most high value equipment through, being able to be gotten through government grants known to the world. Well, because my experience in that coma ended up going ahead and teaching me about the difference of time span in reality, right? So, with that coma, it wasn't specified to me whether I was in it for months, days, or years, all right? But in that coma, my consciousness was around for decades, all right? So imagine living decades in the elapsed amount of time. So the person that was in that coma in their 20s ends up going ahead and having the amount of knowledge that somebody in their 80s dedicating their life to education would end up having in that body. All right. So it's like, so what was that video showing? And, that video of reoxidizing the heat in that incense stick, go ahead and shut it down. Well, ultimately, that if you're able to go ahead and calculate the air pressure, wind shear pressure, and actually going ahead and keeping air variable, including, you know, breath, breathing techniques, that ultimately you could end up from a distance without any type of intermediary device actually controlling and manipulating particles down to a cellular level. All right? Because people were like, prove it, prove it. I made the video, I showed it, and I even gave a couple of years for quite literally every single physicist, every single person in the entertainment industry that, you know, considers themselves either an illusionist or a magician to go ahead and, figure out how I did my big one. Nobody was able to, and keep in mind, my big one was literally a concept that has been around for longer than anybody that's still alive, with pyrokinesis. So it's not like it hadn't been a concept or a thought. It quite literally was one of the crowning achievement attempts for people in the magic community, all right? So then imagine the response you get to that is, we're going to pull some satanic panic, demonize them bullshit. It's like, all right, so you want to start a harassment campaign cornered on libel and wanted to go ahead and accuse the individual of fraud too, while they're able to point out, first of all, are you telling me that the government needs 19 years to figure shit out? Because if you are, considering the contracting work that I've done for the government, I do not doubt you. Like, I do not doubt that they're capable of being that incompetent, willfully or not. All right? But in 2002, I was 13 years old, right? And then the same place that wanted to say that I was crazy was charging me $1,000 for month for rent at 15 years old. Child exploitation. Yeah, I'm pretty sure there's a reason why they wanted people to think that I was crazy. Because, I mean, I was one of the clinical trials for Abilify, which, by the way, in a pill form, ended up going ahead and doing irreversible damage, or what was perceived to be irreversible damage, but there was kind of counter damage caused by the blunt force trauma, but that's a whole other story, you know? So now there's going to be some questions when it comes down to the injectable Abilify form, because of the factor that people from the clinical trials with the pill form of Abilify, i.e. me and everybody else who were part of the blind studies, seem to magically be fucking dying or being, picked off by car crashes or just random freak accidents. And it's like, oh, so y'all don't want to pay the settlement money. Yeah, no, I get it. I really get it. Y'all racked up a big ass fucking bill, but if you thought that I'm gonna pay that shit, no, go fuck yourself. If anything, I'm gonna go ahead and expose your corruption. Anyway, so imagine all that ridiculousness. It's like, oh, so you don't want to get exposed for insurance fraud, credit card fraud, bank fraud, charity fraud, which, by the way, going ahead and taking up a collection for somebody's surgical costs and then not paying those surgical costs with the money that you crowdfunded, that's called charity fraud. And you can't go ahead and blame the person, i.e., me, for that because, I was the one person literally not in consciousness. So that ruled me out as a suspect, and you're not happy that the federal government's got questions, especially also the hospital has questions because they're trying to do everything that they can to avoid a medical malpractice lawsuit that is quite literally open and shut with the manipulation of my medical records, and the lack of adherence to, ADA accommodations when it comes down to, treatment and, protocol, when somebody is actually deemed a individual in a vulnerable population. All right. So at this point, the hospital's trying to dodge a lawsuit. The cops are trying to dodge a lawsuit because that video ended up going missing. But they needed that video to go missing because after somebody wakes up from a coma, literally right afterwards, pumping them with anesthesia and then placing their coma, their freshly out of a coma body, which the signs of malnutrition were already there, and placing them in a cell to then drag them out, get brought in front of a judge, and then time served being called. Yeah, yeah, I'm pretty sure that the feds got a pretty serious line of questioning to end up asking the factor that ended up happening to the same person that during, processing, they asked, "Are you sure you weren't white?" Because, implicit bias, uh, abuse of power, racial profiling, you know, not to mention that, but precious civil liberties. But, I proved the financial manipulation. And now the people that are basically being like, "Oh, you should respect me because, I'm older than you." Oh, really? I'll respect you when you're smarter than me. All right? Because your childish fucking antics aren't working, and understand, I've got enough evidence to make sure you and all your fucking cronies go to prison for at least 30 years each. So, you know, sorry if I ended up tipping the scales in the power dynamic that you were so eagerly abusing. But on a scale of 1 to go fuck yourself, uh, I know which way to go. But anyway, my point on that is people trying to reinsert themselves, hoping, "Oh, I hope you don't remember the way that I fucked them over." I do. And just understand something. There's a reason you don't have access to me. Because you tried doing as much as possible to try to drag my name and my reputation through the fucking mud, while simultaneously you want to commit capital fraud because of the fact that that libel lawsuit went in my favor. Because you quite literally went to go make discrimination and, you know, harassment and defamation of character a business model and try to relabel it as, you know, gender studies or, topics, the power dynamic and, different, associations, whether it be familial, romantic, you know, on a sociological level. All right. But fuck me for going ahead and pointing out the factor that, like, hey, with what I have, two questions, one would end up completely exonerating me, because, pretty fucking obvious too that when you declare somebody dead in an attempt to claim on a life insurance policy, and then you want to go ahead and try to drag them to court to try to set up an eviction after you also committed mortgage fraud, you know, it's pretty fucking funny too, the fact that you wanted to, misappropriate funds, embezzle, money launder, evade taxes, and quite literally, you are being like publicly shun the person that pointed out exactly the fucking crimes that I'm committing. Because I don't want to be associated with any of your crimes. You quite literally kidnapped and abducted me and were relying on Stockholm Syndrome in an attempt to not get prosecuted through the 1996 Identity Theft and Assumption Deference Act, or the 1986 Electronic Communication Protection Act. You completely wanted to go ahead and disregard the 1964 Civil Rights Act or the 1965 Anti-KKK Act. But apparently, all right, apparently I know nothing. I'm good for nothing. Yet somehow the same people that wanted to have me publicly smeared as good for nothing are needing my assistance to try to, not get federally indicted. And it's like, good luck with that one. I quite literally prove the factor that, those multiple dimensions of reality are capable to be tapped into, so long as, you've got a basic understanding, through those dimensions of reality, through experience, you know, because I mean, literally to get through death, get through a coma, yeah, it's, it's like, listen, common knowledge too would end up being like you're wondering why the person's got sleep issues, yet meantime, they were quite literally trapped in their own body in a coma. That's not a guilty conscience anxiety situation. That is a traumatized by fucking sleep situation. That's like, going ahead and asking one of the kids from fucking Friday the 13th movies, hey, your sleep habits. Um, yeah, no, this has got to change. And it's like, yeah, no, I'd like to, be able to sleep peacefully, but I got some, you know, fillet fingered douchebag that looks like the inside of a fucking labia gone wrinkled, going ahead and wanting to slash me. And unfortunately, while I'm asleep, that shit ends up appearing in real life, so trust me, I miss sleep as much as you miss me missing sleep. But unfortunately we don't get things the way we want to in this situation, alright? Because trust me, I would love to have never ended up in that coma, but without ending up in that coma, I wouldn't have been able to, confirm a particle physics theory that had been conceptualized back in the 60s or 70s, I believe, and actually demonstrated it. And then I quite literally gave the entirety of the free world an opportunity to go ahead and demonstrate what I demonstrated and be like, yo, if you're able to demonstrate it, no credit goes to me. But there has not been a single individual that has been able to duplicate my results without some form of, CGI, or any type of footage manipulation. So I guess in that aspect, I'm one of a kind. So cool, I'm one of a kind. And, quite literally, to me demonstrating that would end up taking that Nobel Physics Theory, you know, or Nobel Physics Prize away from the United Kingdoms and giving it to the United States. So people not in the United States wanting to go ahead and fight over about the legitimacy of it, I'm willing to give an in-person demonstration, but apparently there are some people, within the government experimentation community that are kind of like, you definitely outpaced the entirety of the science community, and you've caused a resurgence of different junk sciences that had been deemed as junk sciences since the 60s or 70s, going ahead and showing like, hey, there are more answers back there than you thought there were. But with the technology that there is now, plus some of the base research from there, you'd be surprised the different results that you would end up getting, so long as you go ahead and keep the constants constant and properly document the variables. But what do I know? I'm only the person that demonstrated, reality warping. And also, another little secret, if you don't have the right information to be able to figure out an equation, you're not going to be able to duplicate the results. All right. String theory says that there's 10 to 11 dimensions. All right. That does not mean there are only 10 or 11 dimensions. If you have the accurate amount of dimensions that there really are, the physical results that you would end up getting would be drastically different, i.e., being able to replicate and duplicate my, finished product. But you go ahead. Apparently you're the smart one. I'm just apparently the village idiot. The village idiot that quite literally solved physics theory and a physics equation that predates my existence. But you got this. You totally got this.